Hello and welcome. My name is Eric Vargas, and I am an alumni of the Kroc School of Peace Studies Peace and Justice Master's Program here at USD, and I am also the founder of the Palestine Solidarity Committee at USD. I want to begin by acknowledging that we are present on the unceded lands of the Kumeyaay people. Our presence here today is rooted in a generational injustice that we should all feel obligated to address, as it is due to theft, repression, enslavement, and cultural erasure, a history most relevant to the context of education, organizing, and advocacy efforts around Palestine. Being the son of an immigrant, I acknowledge that those of us who are immigrants or the descendant of immigrants are fundamentally settlers on the lands of others. I believe it is a collective responsibility to seek ways of achieving justice for the people whose lands we occupy. Until the lions have their storytellers, tales of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. In battles of truth and justice, censorship is one of the methods employed to preserve the supremacy of the master narrative and to suppress the voices of those who actively challenge its lies and abuses. Tonight's panelists will discuss persistent efforts to silence Palestinian artists, scholars, and activists, as well as to delegitimize the protests of individuals and communities standing in solidarity with the anti-colonial struggle of the Palestinians. On behalf of the Faculty Alumni Student Coalition here at USD, I would like to welcome each and every one of you to this panel, and I am grateful for your desire to learn and find deeper understanding of one of the most important topics of the last several decades, and especially in the last several months. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to acknowledge the most recent updates in Gaza. Today is day 166 of an abhorrent genocide. More than 40,000 Palestinians in Gaza have been murdered or are presumed dead, with 15,000 of those being children. The UN has recently reported over 1 million Palestinians in Gaza are facing imminent death. The only way to end this genocide is for the international community, and specifically US citizens, to demand the Biden administration to call for a permanent ceasefire, lift the siege on Gaza, and end US military funding to Israel that totals over $3.8 billion a year in US taxpayer money. For sustainable peace, justice needs to be achieved, which is by demanding for the end of the occupation of Palestinian lands, for Palestinians to be able to return to their land and have their human rights be fully and equally respected. I appreciate you all and want to thank you for your time and also your respect given to our speakers. We have a zero tolerance policy for anyone interrupting or disrespecting our speakers, so please keep any questions for after the presentations, where we will have an open Q&A session. This event is also occurring during the holy month of Ramadan, and those who are observing Ramadan will need to break fast at 7:01 today. We will take a quick 15-minute intermission for those who need to break fast and want to pray, and plan for us to resume at roughly 7:16. Due to the tight schedule we are under, we apologize for only providing a 15-minute intermission, and we hope that it will be enough time for you to join us back at 7:16. We have dates courtesy of Aladdin Mediterranean Restaurant and water in the back, so please feel free to grab them now to be ready to break fast. The dates are on the right side here, and then waters are on the aisles of each side. If you wish to ask a question during the Q&A session, we will be handing out index cards and collecting them after the final presentation. We will notify the audience when it's time to break fast, and if one of our presenters is still speaking, the intermission will start once that presentation is over. So I'll make a brief announcement that it's time to break fast if the presentation is still going. The next event for the Gaza at USD Teach-in series will be after spring break, which is a screening and discussion of Madi Fleifeld's film, A World Not Ours, on Wednesday, April 3rd. The film explores the generational trauma imposed on Palestinian refugees through a familial and poetic lens. With that being said, I would like to now introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Samia Halaby, a pioneering Palestinian American visual artist whose creative work includes paintings, digital images, and digital projections. She was born in Jerusalem in 1936 and began her art career in the US in the 1950s. She received her MA from Michigan State University and her MFA from Indiana University. She has taught at the Yale School of the Arts at Indiana University, the University of Hawaii, the Kansas City Art Institute, and the University of Michigan. Samia is a renowned abstract painter who has exhibited her work nationally and internationally. She's also a scholar and has focused her research on the liberation art of Palestine. Her video presentation was recorded in early February 2024 The recording of Samia's presentation was done for a panel presented by the Center for Human Rights and the Arts at Bard College. The panel was titled In Our Thousands, In Our Millions, Censorship and Anti-Colonial Solidarity with Palestine, and was presented on February 13th, 2024 at Bard College. Samia Halaby's video presentation is being screened this evening with Samia's permission and the permission of the Center for Human Rights and the Arts, and we are grateful for their support of the Gaza at USD Teach-in series. Samia sends you all her very best wishes. Our second speaker will be Dr. Ahlam Muhtaseb. Dr. Muhtaseb is a professor of media studies and the graduate coordinator of the Department of Communication Studies at Cal State University, San Bernardino. Her documentary, 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, was screened as part of this teach-in series on February 22nd. The film, co-produced and co-directed with Andy Trimlett, focuses on the year 1948 and its catastrophic consequences for the Palestinian nation. The film originated from her fieldwork in Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon, Syria, and Palestine. She has an MA in journalism and a PhD in communication studies from the University of Memphis, Tennessee. Her research interests include digital communication, digital resistance and decolonization, social justice, and diasporic communities. Dr. Muhtaseb is working currently on a study of Palestinian digital resistance and decolonizing digital spaces. She was the producer and lead researcher of the documentary 36 Seconds, Portrait of a Hate Crime, which centered the 3 young Muslims murdered in Chapel Hill in 2015 in its discussion of the state of hate crimes, Islamophobia, and racism in the U.S. The film had its global premiere at the DOC New York City Film Festival in November of 2023 and won the subject matter grant for audience outreach and impact efforts. Third, we have John Halaby. John's artwork investigates narrative of cultural survival and political resistance in colonized and diasporic communities. His drawings, paintings, photographs, oral history archives, and documentary films visualize the tensions between the emotional presence and physical absence of populations whose cultures have been devastated by the violent intrusions of settler colonialism. Halaby's artwork is produced as a result of extended personal engagements with marginalized communities and is designed to provide an arena for both the participants and the viewers to meditate on survival and resistance as conditions that shape the life experiences of displaced populations. Halaby's artwork has been exhibited nationally and internationally. An exhibit of his drawings titled Listening to the Unheard, Drawing the Unseen, Meditations of Presence and Absence in Native Lands was recently on view at the Oceanside Museum of Art in Southern California. John Halaby is a professor of visual arts and has taught at the University of San Diego since 1991. He received his MFA from the University of Houston in 1983 and his BA from Brooklyn College in 1979. Our fourth panelist is Samar Ismail. A senior at UCSD, San Diego, Samar is pursuing a double major in political science and communication with a focus on international relations. As one of the leading members of Students for Justice in Palestine at UC San Diego, she leads with a passion for advocacy and change. In addition, Samar serves as the co-head of the Social Justice Committee for the Muslim Student Association at UC San Diego. Her dedication for social justice extends further into the role of community organizer for the Council on American Islamic Relations in San Diego, where efforts are concentrated on promoting civil rights, securing a fair representation, and encouraging dialogue across diverse groups. I will conclude the presentation section of this event with a brief presentation of my own to tie all of these concepts together. With that being said, we'll begin by playing the video from Samia Halaby.
For about 3 years, nearly 3 years, 2.5, Elliot Reichert and I, Elliot is a curator at the Eskenazi Museum at Indiana University. We had been carefully planning a retrospective exhibition of my work. This is an exhibition, is a collaboration, a serious work of collaboration and scholarly effort by the curator and myself. It takes effort in collecting the artwork. A catalog was printed, a 1-inch hardcover catalog that is really an excellent book. It had been printed, designed, planned, a lot of work goes into making a book. And the first copies were already delivered. It was in shipment. The paintings had been picked up from museums, from collectors, and one very large one from Beirut was to open to the public to come and see on the 10th of February, but an opening celebration was planned for the 23rd of February, and that celebration included a carefully planned performance of a digital artwork between me and a sound musician. And then suddenly in December, I received a phone call first, very brief, cursory one, and then followed by a letter informing me that the show was canceled. It was a shock, no doubt. I had not expected it. I had thought that somehow I was immune because Indiana University knew me very well. I am an alumna of Indiana University. I graduated from there with an MFA degree in 1963, and from 69 to 72, I was a professor there who was awarded tenure there, and I left at that point to go teach at another place. But Indiana has a full file on me. There's no need to say they didn't know or I was an unexpected quantity. Furthermore, I had presented a webinar to the Indiana University community on my artwork during those 3 years of preparation that were going on. The only thing that changed was in October 7th, the beginning of the horrible genocide against the Palestinian people. And accompanying that was a huge repression of Palestinian voices and supporters of Palestine. Unbelievable. At Indiana University itself, there was a Professor Sino who was also suspended, my whole show was canceled. I want to say I'm laughing about it. I consider it a little laughable. But I do take seriously those who suffer and lose their livelihoods, because that's not a joke. You're threatening someone's existence. You're shaking them up very badly when you take away their daily living. So it came as a shock. And how is that different? I've mentioned I've experienced racism in the art world and in the USA throughout on many different levels. I came to the USA when I was 14, very naive, typical open-hearted, naive Palestinian kid. I couldn't understand what's going on. I could tell it was different and weird, and some of it totally unexpected. But and then a lot of liberal, rejection without, being nice. Oh, how cute, how pleasant, how sweet, how wonderful the artwork, but rejection. Silent, unexplained rejection. Here, I couldn't tell you that this was silent. This was sudden, clear. There's only one thing that changed. We had a delightful relationship up till the huge and horrible genocide against the Palestinian people was begun by Israel and supported insanely by the US government in the most open, admissive kind of way. And so there's no doubt to me, this is just so obviously a matter of racism. The only reason my show was canceled, my retrospective was canceled, is because I was Palestinian, no other reason. If there were other reasons, they certainly would have surfaced during the years of preparation. There was no communication between me and Indiana University on this issue. The letter they sent me canceling the show was only 2 sentences. The show is canceled. News. And the other sentence said, your artwork will be returned safely. I wrote and I objected, saying, it's wise to think and be cognizant of what the future will say when they look back at this. And I'm willing to meet with you and resolve any issues, but they didn't answer. Silence was their answer. I wrote again and I said, if you don't answer me within a certain deadline, I would consider that your decision was final. Well, of course, they were totally quiet. We began to be activists to publicize this event. My first reaction, really, if someone wants to ask my feelings, is that, hey, I lost my first home in Palestine, and I admired the Midwest and the working class culture that was there. And I always felt like I was educated in the Midwest. It was very good education. I really benefited and absorbed it very open-heartedly. And here they were taking it away from me. Like, hey, I've lost my second home now. But anyway, I wanted to, in our struggle, I want to make it very clear that our struggle never said Indiana University is a bad place. We always made it clear that there's a distinction between the administration and the students, the faculty, and the staff, and the workers who work there, who earn their daily living working there. We were not saying the institution is bad. We were saying the administration has denied what is correctly its duty to its constituency and instead practiced this power of decision to obey those from government who probably directed it to, they took, obviously, I don't know for a fact who called who and what happened, but in their explanations to the press, it was clear that there was pressure from above. Over the years, Palestinian art has been very interesting to me, and it's my heritage, but I always say I'm an internationalist. Nobody wanted to accept that Palestinian art was on a high level and that there was great work being done. The art of the Intifada was very impressive, and like many other places in the world, revolutionary motion during the years of the first Intifada really took Palestinian art flying high, and they were deeply influenced by other movements of the 20th century that they admired. Palestine has become the spark for huge demonstrations all over the world. It has become the spark for young Jews in the USA to say it's not in our name. And they are very disciplined, and they're collaborating with Palestinian young people. And the young people all over the world are angry. I look at the Instagram, and I see young Americans, people explaining Palestine better than I could. They're bothering, they're studying history, they're looking at details. And I see something very big happening in the world right now. I see a division taking place between those who are parts of bureaucratized administrations, those who are members of government, leaders in government, and those who are the ruling class on the one side. And on the other side, I see the students, the population, the working class, the faculty, and all those who support this freedom for the Palestinians and the right to return and the right to defend themselves. It is ridiculous to say they don't have a right to defend themselves. I thank you for inviting me, and I hope this movement grows and grows and grows. I hope we will all act against censorship. The massacre in Gaza is horrible. We hear that 20,000 or 22,000 were killed and 11,000 children. No one's counting the dead under the rubble. No one's counting the bad air killing the babies. No one's counting how many illnesses and diseases have taken hold. No one's counting the suffering that will happen due to the weaponization by Israel, the denial of water, of food, of medical care, the destruction of culture, the destruction of mosques and churches that are ancient and valuable, of universities, of schools. So I say, let this movement grow and grow and grow and grow. We need it. And we need it to go snowballing down the mountain and getting so big that it crashes all these bureaucratic ruling circles and allows us to make something fresh and new and take care of the world, take care of the globe and the way it is being destroyed. Well, thank you very much. I've spoken enough, and I wish you will have a really good panel and a good discussion.
So now we'll have Dr. Muhtaseb come up, and the rest of the panelists can take a seat. Should go up in a second.
It's gonna come. And not to kill myself here, so I could do that. Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me well? Okay, can we get rid of this, please? Can you move it so I can see everyone? Yes, not hiding. Thank you very much for inviting me tonight. Thank you for the organizers, especially Eric and Professor John Halaqa. And this is my fifth presentation at the University of San Diego. So you guys have to hire me now, like in 1 year, okay, fifth time. But I'm really privileged and honored, especially, being in space with a great, amazing artist like Samia Halaby, who I met 2 years ago in New York, and I'm just like thrilled to see her again. Although, unfortunately, talking about suppression. Okay. Okay, so I decided today to talk about the multiple forms of censorship. I don't want to only talk about my experience, but first provide some general information. And how many of you are fasting today? I just want to see by a show of hand, if you don't mind. Well, okay, a few. I know you're going to see sandwiches on the screen, and it's very hard at the end, but I'll do my best not to be boring. So there are so many forms of suppression and silencing, especially of Palestinian voices, of course, especially as Samia Halaby said, after October 7. And I will talk about some of those, but I come with a fresh example, and that's why you see me in my activist clothes today, because I just came back from San Bernardino, where, I work, Cal State San Bernardino. I had to drive, 2 hours and then come back 2 hours. So because we had actually a discussion and a vote on a resolution that the caucus of the faculty, the California Faculty Association Union adopted, one of the caucuses, which is the Palestine Arab and Muslim Caucus, which is part of CFA or California Faculty Association. And that today, I come with a fresh example of what I call procedural suppression and censorship. How you can use procedure and meetings and kill something, kill emotion, prevent someone from speaking. We have been trying to get this resolution for 5 months. For 5 months, since November 6 or 7, we have been trying to have it just a discussion and a vote, regardless of how the vote is going to go. Well, the good news is it passed today, but it took so much. It took about an hour when they said we are stressed for time. We can't have another agenda item because they refused to put it on the agenda. And we came today and we actually enforced it from the floor. So they took about an hour to discuss not having time to discuss the resolution. So that's number one. Remember that procedural suppression, which I experienced today. The good news is it passed with flying colors. So some of the forms actually we are talking about, and I will show you some examples, are spying, surveillance, doxing. For those of you who don't know the word, it's when content from online is taken and weaponized against a certain person. And of course, this is in the case of, and I'm sure, someone is going to talk more about this, but in the case of students and faculty, it's now at unbelievable high rate happening to us every day. Okay, before I, get into some of the materials I wanted to share, there is a documentary I would love for every one of you to watch. It's by Al Jazeera. It's called The Lobby. It's 3.5 hours. We had a cut of an hour that we showed at my school just last week. Was it the last week or the week before? The week before, actually. And it is a documentary of a young Jewish man who went undercover and infiltrated the Israeli lobby in the United States. It was first done in the United Kingdom and then in the United States. And it actually gives you like a meticulous narration of all the different forms of suppression and silencing and surveillance that the lobby practices against our communities, especially students, faculty, and staff. And not only Palestinians, but actually, as you will see, anyone who dares to speak about justice in Palestine, simply. So now, as Ms. Samia Halaby just said, after October 7, like it became, you know, suppression and censorship on steroids, right? This is another, you know, another shot. I actually have a video, but I'm going to skip it because of, for time's sake. But in the, whether in the video itself, in the documentary, or whether from my own experience, documenting those for a group actually called California Scholars for Academic Freedom, which I'm a member of, you would conclude that there is a huge network of support, you know, that has a lot of money to support all these efforts to suppress and suppress and suppress. And from all these experiences, you know, documenting, as I said, for California Scholars for Academic Freedom, or my own experience, or experiences of some of my close, you know, friends and colleagues, I came up with a list. It's not, you know, conclusive, but it shows you the different arms of the lobby in the United States, which is funded by actually a very similar industry, which is the Islamophobia industry. On top, as you can see, I highlighted ADL, which stands for the Anti-Defamation League, because it's the most dangerous organization in the United States. ADL is considered one of the most reputable, you know, organizations defending human rights and civil rights and minorities. This is how they sell themselves. But in reality, it has a long history of suppressing not only Palestinians or supporters of justice in Palestine, but actually a lot of our Black and brown communities and activists in general, because a lot of time our work is intersectional. So they attack the work of other communities just because they might actually intersect with our work. One of the top weapons of ADL and other, you know, arms of the lobby is weaponizing anti-Semitism. And we did actually an excellent panel on our campus. I have the recording. Anyone interested, I could send you that. It's online. If you put CSUSB weaponizing anti-Semitism, you could find it. But that has taken like the main form of shutting down any conversation. All you have to do is invoke anti-Semitism, and then you receive emails from the provost or from the president or from academic affairs as a faculty, and that gets you in a process of self-defense that derails you from your work, really, and from doing the things you like to do, such as research, such as, you know, engaging with the community, teaching students, doing your classes. And it really drains you, and that's exactly what it's meant for, because it doesn't hold water, honestly. It doesn't go anywhere, but it does derail the work of a faculty member. And in the case of students, sometimes, actually, it could be very damaging. It could lead to students losing scholarships, like the case of my husband, actually, when he was a student, or, you know, losing your job, and other, you know, serious repercussions. And part of this is based on using a definition of anti-Semitism that equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism, which is, of course, is a big fallacy, because when you are engaged, you have the right to engage in, you know, critiquing and being against the policies of a country. That's absolutely okay. But they weaponize it to prevent us from critiquing the policies, the genocidal policies, for example, committed by Israel in Gaza, as Samia Halaby said. And they depend to a great extent on a specific definition, and that's the International Holocaust Remembers Alliance definition, which, as I said, equates the two. Now the problem is, within that framework, they started criminalizing the use of words such as genocide, free Palestine, from the river to the sea, and the list goes on. But it's unbelievable attempt to suppress and silence. And I'm going to go through this quickly. If I have few slides, but I don't want to go over time and be respectful. But, I wanted to show some examples of how ADL has been at the forefront of weaponizing anti-Semitism against everyone, including Jewish Voice for Peace, a group that is anti-Zionist that has been leading the demonstrations and marches against the genocide in Gaza, to the extent that, I think I have it here, they eventually announced that they are a hate group. So ADL, Anti-Defamation League, is accusing Jewish Voice for Peace of anti-Semitism and also being a hate group because of their activism, in supporting Gaza and against the genocide. Again, I would be more than happy to share this. That actually, I don't know how I actually was able to do that. Maybe. Well, I'm very impressed by my skills that I wasn't aware I did them. But there is a campaign called Drop the ADL campaign, and it's actually led by Jewish Voice for Peace, or at least that's how it started, with Jewish Voice for Peace a few years ago. You can check it online. And it talks actually about this systematic process of silencing through those charges. This is actually a newly released report on the industry behind, weaponizing anti-Semitism, basically, and behind, the suppression of Palestinian voices. And it links it also to the industry of Islamophobia. It's a very good report issued by Rutgers University. Again, if you want to take a screenshot or something, before I move on. It's the Rutgers Law School Center for Security, Race, and Rights, and they actually have excellent programming if you want to be on their listserv. They have one or two every month. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about my experience because that's what they asked me to talk about. And the first one was actually when we released our documentary, 1948 Creation Catastrophe. Dr. Farid Abdel-Noor is here. He's one of the superstars in the film. And this is a massive amount of work over 10 years by me and my co-director, co-producer, Andy Trimlett, who actually we were here last month. And in the same, actually, hall. We did the film screening and a discussion. And it's meticulously researched. We spent thousands of hours working on the film over 10 years. But the fact that it's talking about the conflict and showing the systematic ethnic expulsion of Palestinians and showing the story really of what happened in 1948, a little bit before, a little bit after, and how this is a primer for what is happening today. It was widely suppressed, and until today, actually, every time we try to screen it, we still get resistance, and they receive, a lot of emails and letters, anyone who's trying to screen it. And basically, I think there were several attempts that were the highlight of such suppression, including our screening in my own university at the Pond Desert campus, and including a screening by the University of California, Irvine, UCI. I think because several colleges invited us and had, this big event. Same thing with the Palm Desert campus because they had a big event and invited the community. So every time there is more of a more formal, screening, this happens more often. And the most serious one was when we tried to screen it at West Hollywood as part of the Human Rights Speaker Series organized by the city of West Hollywood. And we had the screening scheduled. It was on the books. It sold out. And we were going with it. They needed a panel. We were preparing the panel. They didn't want us to discuss it. They wanted a panel of scholars, which we said, sure. And then out of a sudden, there is a leak of the pressure on West Hollywood to cancel, and I'm shocked. Somebody sends me, this what do you call it, article in WeHoville, the main newsletter, saying terrible things about me, doxed out of Canary Mission website, a blacklisting website by one of the branches of the Israeli lobby, APAC. And sorry, someone is really trying to call me now. Great. And I'm shocked. Like, I'm reading about myself in the newspaper, and they are attacking only me, not Andy, because he's a white man, but they are attacking the brown woman, of course, and saying terrible things about me that they took out of Canary Mission. Anyway, it's a long story, so I'm going to make it short, but basically, they accused me, of course, of anti-Semitism, supporting terrorism, etc. So the FBI let me just support terrorism in the United States. And it went back and forth. So there was pushback from the communities of scholars, especially like California Scholars for Academic Freedom. Even my provost and my two deans, it was so outrageous that they had to write to the city and say, you cannot infringe on her academic freedom. And, so anyway, so that led them to reschedule and then cancel and then reschedule 3 times until they gave us the final date of April 16, 2019. So I was in South Africa. I come back, and there is the last attempt of censorship. So I'm going to give you examples of the different methods. They wanted to have a meeting on April 2nd, 2019, to actually totally change the laws, the bylaws of the city in order to take the scheduling outside the realm of the staff into the hands of the elected politicians or officials, the council members. So like an outrageous attempt until the very last end to suppress the film because the staff said we cannot cancel it, legally we cannot. That's against the Constitution. So I actually went to that meeting and I had to sit through 46 people talking about me who don't know me, who has not seen the film. Most of them has not seen the film. Reading from a script from, I think at that time it was either the Amcha Initiative or one of those arms. Canvas Watch, I think. Just reading a script over and over, describing me with the same accusations, to suppress the film and the screening. And I'm sitting there listening to them, again, people I don't know, and only focusing on me, again, not on Andy Trimlett. And I talked, actually, and there were some of my supporters, also people who knew me, who said there is no way, Jewish Voice for Peace were there from LA, and other, people who came and spoke. And the vote was supposed to be 3 against the screening or, for changing the laws, 2 for the screening or not changing the laws to prevent the screening. And it went until 11:30, but the last person to vote was one of the council members who we thought she would vote against because she was quoted in the newspaper saying, again, horrible things about me without knowing me, from, in the form of doxing, because she read things on Canary Mission that was shared with her. But she surprised us because she said, and she's Jewish herself, and she said, I watched this film last night, so I can make an informed decision. Thank you. Everyone should have done that. And she said, was it a hard film to watch? Absolutely. Did it have a point of view? Of course. Was it anti-Semitic? Absolutely not. Was it hateful? Absolutely not. It's actually a well-documented film. It was hard to watch. But it is not anything you are describing it. And maybe you should watch it and judge for yourself instead of suppressing it and preventing anyone from watching it. And she said, what should I do next? Go up and burn the books. I pledged allegiance to the Constitution, etc. Anyway, passed. Eventually, we screened. Thank you, the lobby, I guess, for doing a promotion because we had a full, hall, and also we had a long line of people trying to come in. So, lesson number 1, persevere. Don't give up. Stand your ground. I have some other cases, but I know I'm running out of time because I see that Eric is sitting behind me. So those are some of the more recent cases, and I started actually putting them on slides and documenting. Then I stopped because honestly, there is no limit. I mean, my experience today, for example, my experience yesterday, because I had an experience yesterday by my dean, experience a week before with someone who doxed me from Canary Mission and put a whole 4-minute video of me accusing me of weird things like threatening that person. So I stopped doing that. And I think I talked about this, so I'm going to skip this. Let's talk about another form of suppression. And I guess this one became international news, not by my choice, but by what happened, basically. So basically, I was invited, and let me see what is my next slide. Yeah, well, okay, maybe my next slide will show. So I was invited by the president, the elected president of the National Communication Association, to deliver part of his presidential address. He invited me and another 5 speakers because he wanted to decenter his voice, and he's also half Palestinian, by the way, and allow like historically marginalized voices to be heard at the presidential address. And it was a great idea, and I loved it. And this was before October 7. So I accepted the invitation, and in the invitation, he said he would love for us to try to imagine the discipline of communication studies, where it's, like, how would we imagine it different? And for me, it was, like a decolonization process of the discipline that has been actually called for over and over by especially faculty of color, in the discipline. So anyway, of course, October 7 happened. I had to change my speech where I center Gaza because I can't not center genocide and Palestine. So after back and forth, we agreed on a speech that would deliver, on my promise to him to be true to his vision, but at the same time do what I wanted to do, which is center the lack of centering of Palestine, and of course, talking about how difficult it is, the epistemic violence of being forced to talk about something when you really want to talk about something else. So that was actually central in my speech. And I'm trying, not to use big words, but anyway. So I was on the flyers. As you can see, this is like a big, what do you call them? What do you call these? Anyway, banners, yes. Our pictures, our names. And half an hour before we go on stage, while we were rehearsing, like it was a bigger room than this, but we were literally rehearsing in front of the stage to prepare, who was going to go first, etc. And the president comes and says, I'm sorry. Well, first he says, let's sit all in a circle. And then he says, I'm sorry, we have an issue. There is concern. Sorry, I'm going to move this if you don't mind. Oh, doesn't move. Never mind. Tried. You like this? Yeah. Have to see everyone. Anyways, he said, people are concerned about the speeches. Some of them actually were very powerful speeches, from people of color, marginalized communities, from queers, etc. And he said, there are like issues of talking about colonialism and implicating NCA. And then he looked at me and said, honestly, it boils down to Ahlam's speech. And he said, they don't want her to deliver her speech. And if she doesn't, they will let us continue with the presidential address. And I was in shock. I didn't know what to say because I didn't want to impact. And we also have 4 or 5 performers in addition to the speakers. And everyone said, if she doesn't go, we don't go. So that's number 2, solidarity, collective work, very important. Thank you. And so I said, what if I go on stage and defy, like, what's going to happen? Like, what are they going to do? And he said, well, they can probably call security and take you down. Everyone was not comfortable with the idea, so I had to go with the crowd. I would have done it. But basically, we agreed to do a walkout. This is why you see my crazy picture here. Where did it go? This one? And let me remember, what is this? This is, okay, so I forgot to say something, that my speech, I was supposed to deliver it in Arabic, and it should have been behind me in slides in English. That's how they got a copy of it, of the translation, so they could put it on the official slides when I deliver my part of the speech. So that was another way of decolonizing NCA, which would, I think, never happen, is to actually also introduce new languages and not to center English all the time. So that was another way, actually, of saying, well, there are other languages like Arabic. Let me show you how it sounds. That, of course, didn't work and was not allowed, as you can see, because there is a limit, I guess, to institutional change unless there is a revolution. This is my speech in Arabic. This is the walkout. So about 100 scholars, about half of the attendees, basically, they walked out. We decided to put duct tape on our mouth. One of the students brought it to us, one of the grad students. And we started actually delivering our our speeches outside in the atrium. Then the security came and said, you cannot do this. We went back and forth. At the end, they gave us a room, and we ended up delivering everything in the alternate room to more than half of the attendees, by the way. So half of them joined us. And, we defied. Of course, that resulted. So one thing we learned before, talking about suppression and linking things together. So we did a walkout at noon, the same day. And about 250 scholars walked out with us in support of Palestine, support of Gaza, against the genocide. And I think that what attracted their attention. But the things they highlighted in my speech were two words: genocide and free Palestine. Can you imagine? So I used genocide to describe what is happening in Gaza. And that's, as I said, is now a word that they are trying to erase it, to absolutely prevent us from using to describe our experience. Although there is an ICJ case, being pending, where the biggest, the most prominent court for human rights and social justice, etc., decided that there is plausible evidence already, before even dwelling on the case, that Israel was engaged in genocide or genocide crimes. And still, every time we use it, they try to suppress us. And I end by free Palestine. All I want to say is free Palestine, and that was also free Palestine somehow is also anti-Semitic now. Anyway, so we learned that they received, complaints that people felt unsafe. That's the new word now. You don't have to prove you are unsafe. If you feel unsafe, then you can suppress someone else. That's enough to suppress someone else. Today, the Jewish caucus of the Democratic Party had a press conference, and I watched some of it, before I left to campus. And it was unbelievable, because they were trying to change the culture of the universities, the laws and regulations. They had several bills, not only one, that was based on Jewish students not feeling safe. That what was it. How about us? How about Muslim students who had been attacked and killed, literally? And I have so many different ones that I could go over. But that's the new way of suppression. Anyway, it turned into a global scandal. They issued a very terrible apology that actually I didn't receive, by the way. They sent it to everyone except me. And then said, oops, after a week, oh, here you go, we apologize. And after that, they walked back on the apology, and they said, oh, it was miscommunication and confusion about roles. Are you kidding me? It was the executive director of NCA and the director of strategic communication who shut down that. And don't tell me it was confusion, because the president told us everything at that meeting and how aggressive they were with him, etc. But let's learn lesson number 3. There is a silver lining in everything. And guess what? 10 of the most prominent scholarly peer-reviewed journals in our discipline, most of them published by NCA, decided to publish my speech in Arabic, my speech in English, my account, and my picture. So stand your ground, do the right thing, follow what you believe in, and it's going to pay off eventually. People are not stupid. this is my hope. In the United States, that narrative does not fly anymore. It does at the level of Congress and politicians, etc., because there is a lot of money there to buy them off, but people are not buying this anymore. And it's obvious when you have 10 journal editors, and those of you in the audience, faculty, know what it means to be published in 10, leading scholarly journals like this. They all send you, and they all wrote an account of why they are doing this and how scary and terrifying it is to suppress, speech, basically, by the leading communication speech organization, NCA, or National Communication Organization, which is, by the way, the largest organization of communication studies in the world. Anyway, I'm going to skip all of these. Okay, so Eric introduced our new film. We went to New York at the Doc New York Film Festival, won an award, etc. Unrelated, two totally unrelated topics. But when I asked the university to write, usually the university like to write, stories about those, accomplishments. So when I was like, you did not write a story about this film that was released, and, I'm just, following up, I received this email from the AVP for Strategic Communication, in which he basically gives me this whole lecture. He sends it only to me, casually calling me Ahlam, not Dr. Ahlam, Muhtaseb or Professor Muhtaseb, not copying anyone, trying. And this is, I have to say this because this has been my experience, assuming I will not fight back because I'm the hijabi Muslim, right? Because there is a lot of racist, Islamophobic, Orientalist assumptions about my personality, and I'm just going to take it and say, yes, of course, I will abide. So he wrote me this email lecturing me on weaponizing the word genocide, and somehow it's a flashpoint to incite violence against Jews. And like all these accusations, indirectly accusing me of inciting violence against Jews, of being anti-Semitic, etc. And basically telling me we will not promote your work if it includes that word, which is a serious thing, again, in an academic institution. What I did is I wrote back and I said, well, let me copy everyone I know in town, all human and civil rights organizations, all media outlets I know, the president, the vice president, academic affairs, everyone I could think of, Palestinian Feminist Collective, Palestinian Arab and Muslim Caucus of the Union, my union, and say, well, no, you cannot do this, and you are not allowed to this. And while I respect your expertise in only PR, because that's what you do for school, PR, you can't infringe on my academic freedom as an expert who has spent the last few months actually just focusing on the use of the word genocide and doing research on it. So anyway, it's a long email. I also told him about the weaponizing anti-Islamophobia. Sorry, other way around. Weaponizing anti-Semitism webinar. Maybe he could learn something about it. And before I end, I just want to say there were many, many other things that happened after that. But honestly, I'm just too exhausted. And I'm also hungry, let's face it, and thirsty. So I want to break my fast. But there are so many examples to capture. It gets exhausting and it derails us from the important work we continue to do. That's the whole point, really. Because legally, it goes nowhere. They tried, and I could cite, legal cases over and over and nothing. They tried with American Studies Association. They tried with individual scholars like Rabab Abdelhadi from San Francisco State. I could cite like so many cases, old and new. It's very obvious it's only to derail us from our work, to distract us, to obfuscate, to cancel us, which doesn't even work, and just take this time and push us from doing the work we are supposed to do. But again, as I said, we persist, we resist, we insist on things, and we just continue the fight. And as I said, there is silver lining. Even when we are going through terrible genocide, one of the worst probably the world has witnessed, And remember, it's funded by our own money here, all of us here. We are funding the genocide. And in spite of that, I'm just, yes, you see, I'm very good with time. I'm done. We just keep the fight and we never give up. Thank you very much for listening. And sorry if I rushed.
All righty. Welcome back. Thank you all for your patience. And I'm also going to share a word of thank you, especially to Eric for working so hard to put this panel together and for inviting us all. I really want to thank the students for being here, especially during midterms when I know their stress level is kind of high. And I want to thank our faculty, colleagues, and also our guests from other universities and the community for being here. And a very special thanks for the members of the Gaza at USD Coalition. It's an amazing group of faculty and alumni who have banded together because they all follow the religion of justice. And now they believe in justice in Palestine, and they're very actively committed to justice in Palestine. So thank you all for your solidarity, for your support, for your camaraderie in making all of these events happening. So there's lots more this semester. Don't think that this is the last one just because we have spring break. This phone is kind of, okay, sorry. So Eric, you said I have an hour and 15 minutes or just 15 minutes? All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about censorship. I'm only going to show you 3, maybe 4 slides, but I really just want to reflect on censorship, on this censorship of artists, of writers, of cultural workers, but also of activists. So just some general reflections on this idea of censorship, the censorship of speech, of art, of literature, of works that address topics that confront the veracity of the dominant culture. And censorship is fundamentally a form of erasure, a process of harassment and intimidation. And it's used to mute, to cancel the voices as well as the work of those who challenge the master narrative. Censorship, it's a process of denying the other permission to speak. In the case of Palestine, censorship has been systematically used as a practice of erasing a culture, erasing a people, erasing their history, and erasing the Palestinians' calls for justice. And censorship occurs in many different forms that are almost always deployed simultaneously. And Ahlam and Samia addressed the whole sort of hidden aspect, but I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well. There are extreme forms of censorship, and assassination is the conclusive method of censoring a person. And if you think I'm exaggerating, just think of Ghassan Kanafani, the Palestinian writer, or Najil Ali, the Palestinian artist. While genocide is the final process of silencing a culture. With the destruction of Palestinian culture, the ethnic cleansing and mass displacement of the Palestinian people, the theft of their lands, their businesses, their wealth, the impoverishment of their society, the very rejection of their human rights, and the denial of their existence as a people. People still say the Palestinians don't exist. Palestinians have been experiencing a cultural genocide for 75 years. Very clear form of censorship of the culture. But for the past six months, the near-apocalyptic destruction of the Gaza Strip, combined with the mass slaughter of its civilian population, the forced displacement, starvation of the 2.3 million Palestinians who live in that very narrow strip of land, the cultural genocide that has been inflicted on the Palestinians for 75 years has now been upgraded to a physical genocide. I have to wonder, is this the beginning of the final phase of silencing Palestinian culture? Now, assassination and genocides are truly extreme and unusual forms of censorship. both personal or cultural. Much more common are situations like canceling Samia Halaby's exhibition without explanation, without notice, just cutting it, or shutting down other exhibitions by artists who speak publicly for justice in Palestine, or they call for a ceasefire. How dare they call for a ceasefire? They get canceled. They also call for the unrestricted flow of humanitarian aid. Also more common than assassination has been the firing of art curators. And there's been a number of curators who have lost their positions because they spoke out in support of Palestinian rights. Or people that present lectures and had those talks canceled, or withdrawn invitations that have been withdrawn to present talks or lectures, or the rescinding of honors or grants, and there's been a number of those that have sort of disappeared. As well as protests. People have been attempting to silence protests against Palestinians for the last 6 months. To silence teach-ins. Our very teach-in has been denounced as an anti-Semitic fest. All because we try to address the call for justice in Palestine. All of these efforts are designed to harass, to intimidate, to silence those who speak in support of the human and political rights of the Palestinians. And those who call out the profoundly destructive actions of the settler colonial enterprise that dominates almost every aspect of the life of almost every Palestinian in the West Bank and Gaza. The list I just mentioned highlights the common forms of censorship, things that we can actually identify, address, and resist. But there are a lot of other acts of censorship that occur much more quietly, indirectly, and the great majority of them go unnoticed and unrecorded. When it comes to the visual arts, the great majority of acts of censorship, acts of silencing and erasing, are never heard about and never identified or known. Not only does the public not hear about those acts of censorship, but very often the artists who are the target of those acts may not even be aware that their words are being silenced and that their work is being denied access to the public that they seek to engage with. So these hidden, indirect, unidentified sources of censorship are the things that give me as an artist a lot of trouble. They're the things that really eat at me. As an artist, a Palestinian artist, but even if I wasn't Palestinian, who addresses the experiences of Palestinian displacement, the narratives of cultural survival, most, and I mean most, of my exhibition proposals, of my grant proposals, have been denied. And yes, I know there's probably, most people only get 15% of their application proposals. Most have been denied. While the great majority of my communications with art institutions like museums and galleries have been ignored. Silence. I think they were denied because my work addresses the narratives and experiences of Palestinian refugees and the struggle of indigenous populations to return to the homes that they had been displaced from and the homeland that they'd been denied. But because I can't prove that, I can't fight it. Silencing the artists, muting the art, rendering the artwork unseen and unheard, and the stories that are informed by the experience of Palestinians unknown are the most common forms of censorship. Listening to the unheard, drawing the unseen was the title of my recent exhibition at the Oceanside Museum of Art. And I'm not going to have time to talk about that exhibition or the anxieties it caused me because of the pressure the museum received. I used to have hair before that show. Actually, it all fell off. I deliberately use the words unseen and unheard because the Palestinians are not mute, but their narratives have been consistently muted and deliberately not listened to. They're also not invisible, but their experiences have been consistently erased and not seen. Behind the scenes, silencing of artists happens much more regularly than you can ever imagine. And not just with artists whose work addresses the question of Palestine, but with all topics that challenge the master narrative. Art institutions want to control the discourse on art, and consequently they silence narratives that may offend the sensibilities of the ruling class of art patrons and the government agencies that fund those art institutions. And it seems to be that there's nothing more troubling to those sensibilities than the topic of Palestine or art that is made about Palestine. So I couldn't remember the exact date, 1983 or 1984, I had a conversation with an artist named Leon Golub, a very important American painter who had developed these massive, ambitious, and powerful paintings. The first series he became known for was a series of paintings that really denounced the brutality of the Vietnam War. And then in the early 80s, he was working on a series. When I met him and had this conversation, he was working on a series of paintings, big, brutal, horrific, uncomfortable paintings that were critiquing America's training of right-wing squads in Latin America. I went up to Leon and we had a nice little chat about his work. I was a young fella. I had just finished graduate school. And I said, as a Jewish and American progressive activist artist, you really have a responsibility to address the question of Palestine in your work. And he looked at me with surprise, like, oh no, he says. And I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing. He says, oh no, you can't bring that up. You'll never be able to show your work in this country. And he was absolutely right. 40 years after this conversation, it's still extremely difficult for any artist, Palestinian artists or artists making work about Palestine to exhibit their work in this country. There are exceptions, and there are exceptions because there are a few brave institutions that are willing to stand for justice, and a few brave curators that are willing to support artwork that can make the viewer uncomfortable. Artists like Samia Halaby, just because she's Palestinian, are shut out of the art world. Now, Samia, who I've known for years, has been mostly shut out of the artwork because she's Palestinian. Her paintings don't address Palestine in any literal fashion. They're beautiful, large, lyrical abstractions. She comes out of a school of American lyrical abstract expressionism. But her work, not until very recently, when she began to gain international recognition in Europe and in the Arab world, did American institutions begin to acknowledge her. She's 86, 87 years old. She still works almost every day in her studio. She still has a lot of power. But she was completely ignored for decades and decades. Eric mentioned that she had taught at several schools, and one of the reasons she left is because of the harassment that she received as a Palestinian and as a woman. So the recent cancellation of Samia's exhibit is a demonstration that this nascent acceptance of a Palestinian American artist, a senior, well-established Palestinian American artist, by an art institution like the University of Indiana Museum, is still an extremely shallow and profoundly biased relationship. There's something overwhelmingly corrosive that begins to happen when an artist gets repeatedly ignored, silenced, and denied. Internal self-doubt begins to increase and begins to affect the artist's relationship with the art world, and most importantly, with her or his own artwork. You know, I don't know about you all. Self-doubt is sort of like the engine of my anxieties, right? So it shapes a whole lot of my relationship to my work, and I think that's fairly common for a lot of artists. But this history of persistent denial and rejection really kind of fertilizes the seeds of self-doubt. And it puts that process into sort of hyper mode and develops its internal monologue. And it's really a monologue that all artists have, and it's in some cases, to a degree, a healthy monologue of doubting yourself. Otherwise, you become self-delusional. But this sense of like, is my work good enough? Is it worthy? Is it meaningful? Does it deserve to be seen? Am I making anything that people can understand? So this constant process of undermining yourself is a result of denial, of erasure, of silencing, of censorship. It's a process that renders your work unseen and your ideas unheard. And it does so by those who control the art world. But it also forces you to really profoundly question yourself. And what often happens is that you begin to internalize rejection. And that's a really dangerous process. When you're rejected by others, you really begin to reject your own relationship to your work. There's also something else that happens, is that on a public level, censorship undermines, tell me when I've gone over, I got close to my hour and 15 minutes. I forgot to press start. I'm starting now. I'm just following Ahlam's footsteps. On a public level, censorship undermines the public's ability to see and engage with the work of an artist, to reflect on its content, and to learn from its narratives. But even more impactfully, the repeated denial, silencing, and censoring of an artist can dramatically undermine the artist's creative momentum. And often the artist will shut down. Censorship of an artist's work is an attempted assassination of his creative will. And it's a process that is very covert. It happens without us knowing, without us identifying it, without us being able to address it or fight it. But it happens constantly. Because it eventually makes a lot of artists stop working. And you never hear about them. You never, ever hear about them. And why? Because they've been silenced. And when that happens, they've won. They've won. That's part of that multi-pronged strategy of censoring and silencing. Censorship occurs, in my opinion, because those who try to censor us are afraid of the truth. They can't handle the truth. They're afraid of the narratives, the humanity, the aspirations of the history of those they've oppressed. So they censor, they quiet it down. I'm going to try to skip areas, my apologies. There's also something else in that process within the art world. And I've been exhibiting work for over 4 decades. So I've been on the periphery, on the edges, on the margins of that art world, but I've gotten to know it. One of the things that happens is, instead of shutting down, artists or journalists or scholars or activists, without knowing it, can become chameleons. you know what chameleons are? They're these small, slow lizards that have adapted to changing colors and blending in and disappearing within their surroundings. And that's exactly what the institutions want activist artists to do. They want you to change. They want you to blend in. They want you to disappear. And that's how they win. And they want you to manifest the banality of the art culture, of making work that mirrors that art culture. But if you don't blend in, if we challenge the master narratives, if we insist on identifying humanity, the humanity of the oppressed and the cruelty of the oppressor, they actively and sometimes violently shut us down because they're afraid of the truth. I'm going to skip a section where I talk about my personal anxieties, so I'll move on to other areas. But without the institutions, that relationship between an artist and an institution is really critical because the institution provides the space where you show your work, and it provides that arena of engagement between the public and the artist. And without that, both sides suffer. The public are denied the ability to look. The artist is denied the audience he desires to have him or her look at their work and think about the content. So I'm skipping through, sorry. You know, I won't skip this part, but because I think this idea of the fear of the truth is really common in this country, but also in Israel, a country that dominates Palestine. We live in a nation that is built upon and anchored to a foundation of lies, of theft, and genocide. And when artists begin to address the reality and to speak truth to power, the powers in control, the powers that benefit from that history, silence us, it derails us, it finds ways to undermine our progress in our effort. The other thing that Samia, for example, Samia is a very active artist. I've known her probably 20 years, and she's constantly producing work. But now, what happens to her? She's been derailed. She's spent a lot of energy after 2 years of preparing for this exhibition. She spent a lot of energy dealing with that deep wound, that betrayal of having her work, her exhibit shut down. And how does her work recover? How long will it take? How will it affect the work itself? As artists and as activists, we have to figure out how to fight multiple battles at the same time, because we're going to always be attacked from multiple fronts at the same time. We also have to figure out how to confront various types of censorship without making it worse for ourselves, because we don't want to fight the way they want us to fight. We have to walk and fight our ways. Most importantly, we have to learn to persist. And Ahlam touched on that as one of the most important core things. Persist in our educational effort without being drawn into unnecessary and distracting battle. Our goal as artists, or I should say my goal as a visual artist, is to engage, inform, and educate. And to do that for myself, and then I try to do that with the viewer. And I try to inform, engage, and educate about the struggles of the Palestinians and other indigenous populations who are struggling to return to their native lands. That's the core of my motivation. And if I'm not doing that, or if artists are not engaged in that process of learning and engaging and teaching, then they're probably just sort of creating decorations for rich people's homes, or they're creating sort of aggrandizing images for the ruling class. As visual artists, and this applies, I think, equally to all creative activists for justice, we need to make our work with the utmost care so that it can achieve its objectives in the face of resistance, in the face of erasure, and in the face of persistent efforts that aim to continue to make the experiences of Palestinians unseen and their narratives unheard. I remind myself, and I want to remind you all, that knowledge is the clearest path to truth, and that truth is the shortest trail to justice, and that justice is the only road to peace. So keep talking about Palestine, keep learning about Palestine, keep sharing about Palestine. And I want us to become the storytellers of the lions instead of the storytellers of the of glorifying the royal hunters. Sorry for going way over. I totally ignored your clock. Sorry about that.
Totally okay. Okay.
Hello, thank you all for having me here today. May I say it is such a great honor, being a student activist and uplifting other people's voices and being here, being part of this panel with so many wonderful doctors and artists. And thank you for having me here. And I love what Professor Halaka left off on, which is knowledge. Because I always typically say is that knowledge and education is the one thing that no matter how hard anyone tries, they can never take away from us. Because this is the key to freedom for the Palestinians, because they preyed on the fact that the old will die off and the young will forget. But we are a testament to that we will never forget. And because of you guys being here in this space, going out of your way to learn and educate, it gives us hope. And it reaffirms the belief that, yes, we will see a free Palestine because we will never forget and we will continue learning. So really cool to be part of this larger academic renaissance, especially when it comes to Palestine. And, being an organizer at SJP, CSD, I felt it very necessary today to talk about our role as students, our roles being part of these institutions, and talking about how, at the heart of every single social movement, student-led movements led it. Because if you really think about it for a moment, we are the future. We are the future doctors, the future engineers, the future philosophers, the future politicians. We are the people who are shaping our future. So when our politicians are failing us, the next step down is the students. And that's where we, as an institution, being students, professors, faculty alike, have a really important role to fulfill. I have this quote from Dr. Sasha Constanza-Schock, who is one of the lead department in the lead communications at Harvard. She is part of the National Communications Association that Dr. Ahlam brought up earlier today. So I kind of wanted to give a little bit of an overview of powerful student-led movements that we saw. Not too far from us at UC San Diego, I have a picture of George Winnie Jr., a man who self-emulated on UCSD's campus in protest of the Vietnam War. That created outcry, that created a mass amount of rage on campus, and we saw how many students showed up because, in a just world during the time of the anti-war protests, when the monk set himself on fire in a form of self-emulation, the president at the time responded and said that there has been no image to generate this much emotion, and immediately called for a withdrawal of troops from Cambodia. That was in a just world. Now we've had 4 people self-emulate for the sake of Palestine, and only one got media coverage, and that was Aaron Bushnell. and may he rest in peace. And, looking at all these pictures are at UC San Diego, seeing how many students showed up, and the anti-war movement was one of the largest movements on campuses. And because of students protesting and showing up, they were able to generate change, to exert an amount of pressure needed on these politicians and elected officials. And I count on all of you to do the same. Free speech movement. I love talking about this movement because this movement started at UC Berkeley at a time where our institution was quite literally in the wrong, like little precursor. The institutions are never on the right side. That is why it is our job as students to put them on the right side. So it's kind of really interesting thinking about how, had the students not gotten together and had the students not protested against the university, how would the UC system look like? The fact that they were not allowing any students to hand out documents, to have these conversations needed, being such, pinnacles of knowledge in contemporary society, but banning free speech. Had the students not protested this, would we be able to speak freely about Palestine? Where would our movement be? Where would our classes be? What would we be speaking on? It really has you thinking about these things. But had it gone uncontested by the students, we'd be in a completely different playing field. And I have a picture right here of Jack Wiedenberg, who's in that police officer car, right? And at first, it was seven students who surrounded the police officer's car in the beginning because, he got wrongfully arrested. He didn't want to show his ID. He didn't have to. He wasn't breaking any laws. And that picture right there on the upper left is when all the students came together and supported. And this was it was a big turning point in the free speech movement, because I want you all to think, like, for a moment, that it's never just you. It's very hard, being in an individualistic, like, late stage capitalistic society. We are always like, it's just me. What am I going to do? But it's never just you. What you do influences the actions of all the other. We are a collective, and it's never just you. You look at the Palestinian protests around you, all those people are riding with you. You look in this room, all these people are here with you too. It's never just you. It's a we. And we have to start looking at it from a we perspective. And again, we are capable of creating change like our predecessors did. Now, during the 1960s and 1970s, we saw a bunch of student-led movements, whether it be what was happening with apartheid South Africa, whether it be segregation, whether it be talking about the anti-war protests. There were so many protests on campus. Also, another fun fact, during the 1960s, that was when majority of these campuses were being built and expanded. And looking at the kind of architecture of these campuses, specifically looking at UC San Diego, Price Center is purposely sunken in. Why? And it's easily sectioned off on the right and the left side, because with the intention of literally being built in to section off protests, and for the intention of no center collecting point for anyone to be easily gather to deter protests. The fact that they're willing to change campus architecture to hinder protests should say something, should allow you to understand the power that these student-led movements have. And it's not just UC San Diego. By the way, Price Center is now privatized, so that way they can penalize, actually press charges on a public campus. Yeah, you won't be able to there is no hardcore evidence obviously backing oh, we definitely built our campus to silence student movements. You won't find that. But it's kind of how many times is it going to be more than just a coincidence? Because not just UC San Diego, it's Southern Illinois University, Rice University, Columbia, U Chicago, and even some in France are building their campuses specifically with the intention of hindering movements on campus. And I find that kind of crazy, but also we're capable of doing so much. Oh, my slides didn't update on here, but that's okay. Technical difficulties, but I will, I, can you refresh it? Maybe that's why. Stand by. Okay, cool. So when we look at today and we look at what's happening on campuses today, may I just want to give some context that at the end of the day, every time I do whatever it is for the sake of Palestine, and whenever we do these things, people are like, oh, are you not scared? Are you not this? Who am I to be afraid when people in Gaza don't know whether or not they're going to live the next day? People in Gaza don't know if they're going to be able to have enough food for them and their family. They are still fasting Ramadan. They are still doing everything that is needed of them. And they are not afraid. Who am I to be afraid when I have literally every single resource necessary to ensure my safety at the access of my fingertips? They can't say the same. So this is more so of talking about how these attacks on campus and how it relates to the double standard. You know, the fact that on Columbia's campus, where there were multiple pro-Palestinian students who were attacked by technically members of a foreign military on U.S. soil with chemical weapons, yet you see there is minimal news coverage. You see that Columbia University has yet to say anything about this. Columbia University has yet to properly investigate this. But we all know, had it been the other way around, this would have been on national headlines. Also, UCLA students, when they were early on after October 7th, were doing like kind of like a sit-in teach-in. Someone pulled a knife on them and literally was ready to attack them and assault them. Yet there has been no news coverage. I had to pull this from Council of American Islamic Relations press release. There is no equal media coverage, yet there's no equal safety. You also see this at our events. One event has 6 police cars outside of their event. This is at UCSD, and ours will have like 1 officer. But then when we go and make our protest, even though we've made it abundantly clear to the university we're willing to comply with school rules, they brought in well over 2,000 police officers on our protest the day of divestment. And that comes from a deep place of rooted racism, of painting the picture that we are the terrorists, that we are the instigators, that we are the bad people. It sends that image, and they kept advertising saying like, oh yeah, we're going to increase security on campus, making us look like we're the problem. Do you see how that kind of like ties in of like heavy police presence on like one event? I don't know. Kind of crazy. Also, double standards. I have a picture of this. This was from 2022, spring of 2022. There, we have this place called Graffiti Wall on campus, okay? And we can do whatever it is we want on there. Someone painted the Israeli flag, and we said, you are apartheid. That's a fact. It's deemed by multiple human rights resource centers who are world renowned. And we said, you are apartheid. I wasn't a part of this. If anyone's watching this, I was not even on UCSD's campus. When I say we, I mean UCSD students. And immediately after, UCSD sends out a letter saying, we condemn all forms of anti-Semitism. Where is the anti-Semitism of stating the facts that Israel is an apartheid state? We should be able to have these conversations. Rather, we're met with that. But then on the other hand, when we have Turning Point join us on campus and have a silly little poster that says, Israel aims to protect and terrorists aim to kill, and when approached and asked about it, they said, Palestine was a terrorist-funded state by terrorists for terrorists. Verbatim. That was literally what he said. And when we asked to take it down, they didn't take it down. And nothing. We went to multiple meetings with chancellors, multiple meetings with the CSI. I had put in so much effort into this. I'm like, where's the outrage for this? Like, they're literally blatantly calling us terrorists and causing such a harmful misconception. By the way, this was in early on before October 7th. This was last year. Nothing from the school. But immediately after October 7th, we see how they stand on the attack. They stand against the attack on Israel. We see that there is a blatant double standard on campus, but it's up to us to dismantle it. And as Dr. Ahlam brought up multiple times, don't just accept it. You know, when we went to go past divestment, there was, again, procedurally oppressing. They really love doing that. All of a sudden, they start knowing how to implement wristbands before every single Associated Students meeting. Before our Associated Students meeting for divestment, they changed it last second to Zoom. Last second. So most of my activism, most of my strategy and planning has to be in the moment. Alhamdulillah, I've gotten pretty good at it, like just thinking on the fly, but you know, we make it work. And honestly, it's really like interesting to see how the campuses are going through great lengths to bend their rules backwards and to, you know, do whatever it is at the cost of the Palestinians' livelihood, like, you know, censoring pro-Palestinian student groups or quite literally banning pro-Palestinian student groups. But that is why it is up to us as a community, as faculty, because we know how powerful these institutions are. We will not be silenced, and we will continue showing up. No matter how hard they try to procedurally oppress us, we'll still get stuff done. I almost said something else. We'll get stuff done, whether it be divestment, whether it be getting equal rights, whether it be showing how the university won't stick up to its own standards. That is our job to point it out, and we will not accept that, because for so long you guys kind of have to think of the mind, like where our parents were before us and the people who came before us were, where it's like, keep your head down or be killed. If they grew up in the blood, you can't speak up or be killed. But I'm here, I'm loud, and I'm proud. I know the rest of my peers are loud and proud, and we will not be silenced, no matter how hard they try. And so I'm going to end it off with this. Alhamdulillah, at UCSD, we passed divestment where $8.2 million of our student funds will no longer be going to corporations that support Israel. But that's just the first step. That's just the first step. We are just getting started. These are kind of sort of like building blocks, but it comes down to you guys here as well and continuously showing up, because it is hard. It is all these things, but you need to sit back and realize what's happening for a moment. That we are quite literally watching one of the most well-documented genocides unfold on your iPhone screens. Are you telling me you are not willing to do everything that you possibly can to prevent that, to stop that, to dismantle the state that's doing that and carrying it out with literally the green light from our tax dollars? We are all complicit if you are paying taxes in the United States. We must be doing everything that we can to stop it. Just stop. Like, it's just absolute insanity to me that people still have the audacity to argue or to say that that's not what's happening, or it's like, what more must we show? And if you guys can take away one thing from this, I really, really hope that you know that, similar to our predecessors before as campus, activists, they were able to create change, and so can you. We are all capable of creating change, but you all have to look at it as a collective and remember that you are never alone, and there are ways to create change, but it starts with us. So the second that we all consistently show up and consistently get on the same message and understand what we're doing this for, I promise you we'll see change. Alhamdulillah, we've seen so much, and I can't wait to see what else we can accomplish together.
Okay, we have about 15 minutes more. I know we are at time technically, but if we could get just about 15 minutes more of your time, that'd be great. I want to just wrap these presentations up just to sort of give a core thesis to the theme of this event. So, why censor Palestinian activism? To understand that, it is important to understand how power works in a political and social science field or lens, specifically looking through political organizing. It is understood by some that power comes in three phases or three different forms. For this presentation, we will focus on the third phase of power, shifting worldview through narrative and manufacturing consent. So why control narrative and manufacture consent? Well, first, let's understand their definitions. Narrative describes the way in which storytelling can shape fact and influence the impact on how an audience understands reality. A political narrative's effectiveness and value is measured by the emotions it evokes from the story rather than the amount of truth of that story. Manufacturing consent, as Herman and Chomsky define it, is accepting government policies and actions on the basis of a single perspective offered by mass media with limited or no access to alternative views that might create opposition to such policies. They believe that media will only display a narrative that caters to the view of the ruling class. So, how does one actually shift worldview? Well, first, you mislead or distort beliefs about reality through narrative, or you use storytelling to make people believe something that might not actually be true. Second, you create the impression that things just happen on their own without any specific person or group making them happen, which is through the manufacturing of consent and the use of passive voice reporting and the delivery of information. And third, you hide or distort facts to avoid responsibility, and that's through censorship. And in Israel's case, it's blaming others and pointing fingers for things that they're guilty of by keeping attention away from themselves. The goal of shifting the worldview in this context is to dehumanize Palestinians to achieve the end goal of Zionism. Dehumanization is essential because when a subject of oppression is humanized, it creates sympathy. And if you're sympathetic, then in this case, acts of genocide that are occurring wouldn't be able to occur as easily. To further understand how to shift worldview, we also need to understand passive voice and also understand the relationship between words, their definitions, and how these definitions influence our actions. We assign meaning to words. The meaning or the idea of what a word means informs the way in which we perceive and interact with reality because it's relational. This is a science known as semiotics. So for example, if you're walking on a street and you see a big red sign that says caution, the way your brain processes that sign will inform and decide the way you interact with the environment around you. So when media uses a specific framing of global events, there is great power in the choice of words being used. That power is enough to create consensus, form or change opinion, be suggestive towards beliefs, and downplay or exaggerate the extent of reality. This power was further proven in a study done called Syntax, Semantics, and Sexual Violence Sexual Violence Agency and the Passive Voice, where the authors investigated the relationship between passive voice reports of violence against women and reader acceptance of the violence compared to active voice reports. Their findings showed that the passive voice led readers to belittle the amount of harm suffered by the victim and to lessen the perpetrator's responsibility for the violence relative to the victims. When people were exposed to reports of crimes, including rape and battery, written in passive voice, their attitudes became more negative towards rape victims, also more accepting of rape myths, and more accepting of physical abuse towards women. So let's apply that theory to the events around Palestine. In a report titled Massacred vs. Left to Die, documenting media bias against Palestinians October 7th to November 7th, it found that by October 24th, Israelis had been mentioned a total of 95,468 times, while Palestinians were mentioned 18,982 times. Some of its other findings was that the Israeli hostages got more coverage on CNN and Fox News than the 11,000 plus Palestinians who had been killed by Israel by that time. It also found an insane disparity between the use of the term massacre in reference to what Israelis experienced versus what Palestinians experienced. In the cases where the word massacre did appear in relation to Palestinians, it was because either 1, a Palestinian who was directly affected was interviewed, 2, a pro-Palestine advocate was interviewed, or 3, it was prefaced by the statement, what is being called a massacre. But anyone can just read headlines to see how drastic the disparity was in language and passive voice, but also in the value of truth versus seeking to create a specific reaction from readers and viewers. So last month, when there were more ceasefire talks, the headline said Hamas rejected a ceasefire. But if you read the actual article past the headline, it said that Hamas wanted a permanent ceasefire, but Israel refused because Israel only wanted a temporary pause to be able to continue the aggression and genocide in Gaza only once the Israeli hostages were freed. Or how they identify Palestinian children as people aged 18 and younger, and Israeli children simply as children. Or how in May of 2022, when the media omitted how the American Palestinian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh was assassinated by Israeli snipers while being openly identifiable as a protected class with her press vest, violating the Geneva Conventions. And finally, the fake news about 40 beheaded babies, which was arguably the most useful political narrative that permitted the international community to look the other way, manufacturing consent, and made Palestinians dehumanized to the extent that when Israel began its genocidal campaign, there wouldn't be enough political will to stop it. And it isn't just standard media that is biased. A Palestinian organization known as Hamle has documented 500 cases of digital rights violations of Palestinians between May 6th and May 19th, 2021, throughout various social media platforms. So what is the Israeli narrative in this context? Put simply, the Israeli narrative is that all Palestinians, even children and UN staff by association, are not human, that they're animals, and or that they're terrorists, and that no one is innocent. Again, all of this media bias and censorship is a distraction to only portray the Israeli narrative while silencing any Palestinian narrative that could counter or fact check it. And it serves as a distraction from the atrocities and countless war crimes Israel is committing against Palestinians, such as intentional starvation and famine, false reports of civilian and US staff terrorist links, false reports of rape, torture, illegal settlement expansion, multiple massacres at aid deployment locations, and so much more that we can't point to tonight. Another key narrative for Israel in the broader context of all of this is the conflation of Judaism and Zionism. Portrayed here most explicitly by the Israeli Minister of Social Equality and Women's Advancement, who is a part of Israel's Prime Minister's party, the Likud. She said during a parliament hearing where she said, and I quote, "I am personally proud of the ruins of Gaza and that every baby, even 80 years from now, would tell their grandchildren what the Jews did." Obviously, her exploitation and weaponization of Judaism is abhorrent and anti-Semitic. And this is a constant conflation that is being made by Zionists to further censor pro-Palestine advocacy, as you've heard from the other panelists tonight. The purpose is to dispel any critique towards Israel as anti-Semitic, manufacturing the existence of anti-Semitic sentiment globally to further justify Zionism's oppressive existence, while also distracting the public as they continue colonizing and occupying Palestinian land and creating a perpetual cycle. And the reality of how Zionism is truly an anti-Semitic ideology is encapsulated perfectly in this excerpt from an article written by Mohammed El-Kurd. He said, quote, "Not only do we live in fear of displacement at the hands of colonialism that professes itself as Jewish, not only are our people bombarded by an army that marches under what it claims is the Jewish flag, and not only do Israeli politicians over-enunciate the Jewishness of their operations, we are told to disregard the Star of David soaring on their flag and the Star of David they carve into our skins." And when he says the Star of David that they carve into our skins, he means it quite literally, as this was an incident that happened in August of 2023 where a Palestinian man was beat, tied up, punched, and branded by 16 Israeli police officers whose body cameras conveniently all malfunctioned. So when they censor Palestinian activism, it serves as an intentional, integral part of the Zionist agenda to allow for the oppression and dehumanization of Palestinians as the means to the material goals of Zionism. Thank you very much, and let's have a round of applause for all of our panelists. So we're at 8:10. We're just going to do one or two questions real quick. The panelists, if you want to join us up front. And then I'm going to start off the first question by asking John, could you talk a little bit more about the efforts? Oh, yeah. Okay, so the first question for John, thank you very much. It will be just talk briefly about the efforts to censor this event or the Teach-in series as a whole at USD.
Can you hear me through this? Okay. It's a complicated thing. So the president's office has received lots and lots of emails and calls accusing the Teach-in of being an anti-Semitic fest. They got nervous and I was called into the dean's office. She asked a lot of questions, very thoughtfully. And they protected us. They kind of made it totally possible for us to resume our work, to resume our educational effort, to continue with all of the events without any effort to censor us. So I give them a whole lot of credit. Will that go on? I don't know. I think USD, in this case, in the case of this teach-in, has practiced what it preaches, which is to value freedom of speech and to allow the faculty and alumni to speak honestly and truthfully about this topic. They did get a lot of pressure during the week after Ahlam's screening, and you can see her screening and her conversation on our YouTube channel. They love you, yes. They received 1,600, an average of 1,600 emails a day. Really.
I'm so proud.
That led into Jonathan Graubart's talk, and they were very nervous about Jonathan's talk because a lot of right-wing Israelis don't like what he has to say. So they received a good bit of pressure. I have no idea really what happened behind the scenes, so I'm not going to speculate. But what I do know is I have not received any threats by the administration, any condemnation, or any effort to silence this teaching.
Again, what was the number?
1,600 emails a day.
So
Plus phone calls.
how many days?
You're a troublemaker.
I'm proud.
Your pride is right.
Okay.
I would have been really upset if you said maybe only like few hundred.
Next question. How does one recognize when censorship is occurring? How do you recommend we decolonize our knowledge, sources, methods, etc.? And it's not directed to anyone specifically, but Dr. Muhtaseb, if you want to take it first.
So what was the first part? Sorry.
How does one recognize when censorship is occurring, and how do you recommend we decolonize our knowledge?
How do we recognize how censorship is happening? Yeah, why don't you take that and I will take the second part.
Okay, so how you realize censorship's happening. Things that are easily accessible to everyone else, suddenly there's like a whole new process. For example, I kind of briefly touched about it, is that prior to October 7th and prior to SJP attending the Associated Students meetings, there was no such thing as wristbands necessary upon entering. But subhanAllah, after that, they have this whole new process where it's limited wristbands only for you to get in, wristbands only for you to speak. And you start to see all these kinds of like rules that appear out of thin air to, you know, kind of slow you down or to kind of derail you. But in terms of social media, it's kind of obvious where like your average would be at like 500 views and now you're stagnant at 150. And then in other realms of society, like whether you be in school, again, there's forms or kind of obstacles that are put forth in front of you that wouldn't typically be there. And you kind of have to look at the logic that's being applied to you and see if it's applicable to everyone else. That's how I would say is how you know whether or not you're being censored.
Makes sense? How many days? You said 1,600, but every day.
Over a week.
Okay, just kidding. I just want us to wake up because I know it's getting late and I'm actually very exhausted. Actually, exhausted is an understatement. Because remember, I had to go to San Bernardino and come back while fasting and have a battle during the day. Decolonizing, this is a great question, actually, Eric. And you know, if I'm gonna answer it in a more academic way, it's gonna take me forever. But let's start by centering our voices. I think that's very important, and centering indigenous voices of Black and brown people. That's very, very crucial in our academic, classes and in everything we do, to go back actually to indigenous approaches and knowledge production. For me, it took the shape of, after years of doing media criticism or critique, you know, and saying, oh my God, like what you just did now. Because I do a lot of that, and I still do, of course. It's a very important part of work, and you did a fantastic job, by the way. Should steal some of your slides. But I just decided at one point that it's enough for me to keep on this media critique and to move into media production and knowledge production. So that's a very important aspect of it, is to, especially now that we actually have a lot of tools that makes it easier for us. So I just decided to do that shift, to do that jump. You know, although originally I was not trained as a filmmaker, by the way. I was in media studies, and I took, you know, classes in film, etc. But I never took even classes in production. And I thought, let me try that. It actually worked. And the film was very successful. So now you have a film like 1948, Creation and Catastrophe, being screened all over the world in classes for community centers. That was based on, you know, with the intention of decolonizing knowledge on Palestine. Yeah, so I think maybe that's one very important aspect of knowledge in terms of decolonizing knowledge, is to actually produce knowledge, to reclaim your narrative, as Edward Said said, you know. And as I said, you know, in academia also to change the way we teach. We are so impacted by white-centered approaches and voices in academia, and why those are still valid. I love Chomsky, so I would use him every day, of course. But at the same time, where are our indigenous and black and brown authors and artists, right? And knowledge producers. I did that, for example, you have to be conscious about it. So when I teach the research methods classes, for example, now, I never go back and just count on those typical, you know, textbooks that we have to teach research methods. I always include a text that either addresses decolonization directly and say, this is how you decolonize knowledge production and research and academia, or by a book that shows, you know, aspects of how this transforms, you know, maybe, you know, an excellent book on, I don't know, one of the social movements that you talked about in one of my classes, and the research done around that social movement that is written by an indigenous scholar or by a black scholar. You know, for example, if I'm gonna, as part of my class talks about prisons, right, and incarceration. And definitely I have to include voices of, you know, black scholars, Latinx scholars, Arab scholars, Muslim scholars, you know, because they have different experiences, and their interpretation of this experience and the carceral incarceration industry is going to be definitely different. Would you like to take this question on?
So I will finish tonight's panel with this last question. There was a...
I'm going to have the audience ask questions. Have been very patient.
These are from the audience.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
It's all good. So this question, there was
These were all your great questions.
Oh, no. There was a divestment effort on USD's campus here in the last couple years, but it's lost momentum in the last few months. How do we bring that momentum back? And I'll give this question to John, and then I'll also answer if there's anything left I have to say.
The faculty in the College of Art and Science has been trying to pass a resolution recently, and it's going to be voted on electronically because the discussion was broken up. But that resolution just asks for two simple things. One, a call for an immediate ceasefire and the release or the facilitation of humanitarian aid. And two, for the USD to investigate and reveal any investments or programs that support Israel's occupation of Palestine. And if I'm wrong with the wording, please correct me. Will that pass? I think it will. And it'll be a small step. Now, I think divestment, and really kind of a strong divestment message, it's going to take a lot of effort, concerted effort from the students and the faculty. And it's going to take a lot of education, informing people of the need for divestment, of the history of divestment, of the effectiveness of divestment in the apartheid, against the apartheid regime. Will it pass? I don't know. I don't know. I think USD is a fundamentally very conservative and cautious institution. I think some of the faculty, to my surprise, are not in support of a ceasefire, which I found real odd. Mm-hmm. So that tells me that there is going to be a lot of resistance when it comes to the idea of divestments and sanctions. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. How do we get the ball rolling again? Because Eric set up an initiative last year. I think we just need to educate. I think we need to have a panel on divestment and sanctions. Mm-hmm. And we need to bring in people that can speak to that topic in a very clear way from not just the perspective of Palestine, but other perspectives as well. And then we need to write it and rewrite it and rewrite it so that it's clear and concise and to the point. And then we need to address the arguments. So beginning conversations across campus, forums across campus, finding faculty that are willing to introduce this topic into their classroom in a very legitimate academic fashion will inform our community. And again, education is the path that we need to follow.
Yeah, Summer, if you want to add anything to that,
Okay.
keep it like 2 minutes though, real brief. Thank you so much.
Okay, so divestment, right? We all want to divest that $1 billion endowment that we have in the military industrial complex, but it kind of is like building blocks. Prior to my first year at UC San Diego, SJP was dormant. I don't know how it is at USD in terms of like protests and what's allowed given that this is a private campus, but there needs to be some kind of like actions that directly involve them, whether it be off campus or on campus. Also, what Professor Halaby was talking about, reach out. If you guys are students in here, slowly start going to office hours and talking about Palestine. Get those other professors and faculty involved. Because in order to get to that $4 billion, personally for UCSD, it's $4 billion for that big in divestment from the military industrial complex. We have to divest in building blocks. So right now we just divested student funds, because if I go up to the Board of Regents and say I'd like for you to divest, and we haven't divested yet, what does that mean? So kind of building blocks. So it starts with us, the students, then onto the college councils, then onto the graduate students, onto the professors, onto the university itself. Think of it as building blocks, but again, students, my homies, it starts with us. Let us go to our senates, let us go to our associate students, and let us start having these conversations with our professors, with our faculty, and kind of creating these coalitions on campus. Alhamdulillah, USD is looking pretty great, but have those conversations.
I just want to say, having young people like you guys just gives us so much hope. So thank you so much for all the work you do. Thank you.
And on that point, I'll just mention real quick, the petition for the USD divestment for faculty, alumni, staff, students is still active. You could go to tinyurl.com/BDSUSD. The organization Palestine Solidarity Committee has been going through some restructuring. You can reach out to them on Instagram at PSCUSD or at their email pscusd@gmail.com if you want to get personally involved, and I'll make sure that they reach back out to you if you respond to them. That'll be all for tonight. Thank you so much for your time and patience. I know we're over time. The next event is happening after spring break on April 3rd. Will be a screening of A World Not Ours. Remember, keep coming to events, go to community events, keep speaking out, keep educating. It's super important. Your presence is super important. So thank you all, and I hope you all have a good night. Thanks.